I'm here today to talk to you about whether there still is truth in politics. And to do so, I'm going to look at the Ukraine scandal. I believe it's a microcosm for the Trump administration. I think it perfectly captures the way in which Donald Trump has taken our conception of truth and flipped it on its head and tried to create a reality when we don't think there's objective truth or reality. And so I've selected a quote, one of my favorite quotes from George Orwell: to see what is in front of one's nose needs a constant struggle. I think lately we don't always see what's in front of our nose. And so what I'm going to talk about is what it's like to live in a world where we don't have normal politics, to live in a world where truth seems less connected to politics than maybe at one point it was. Fair warning, we're talking about truth, right? Truth. It's going to be messy. Buckle up. There's going to be, you may be offended. You may be upset. There's going to be some cursing. But that's okay, because the truth is worth it. All right, so let's start. Let's start with Ukraine and walk through some of the logistics of what happened in the Ukraine scandal so we can appreciate the way in which truth is or is not present. So it all starts on July 25th in a phone call between President Trump and President Zelensky of Ukraine. Very normal thing. Presidents talk all the time. Zelensky had just been elected president, so it was a normal call. Ukraine is an ally of the United States, an ally that's in a tough position right now because of Russia, so very normal thing. What's not normal was a couple weeks later when a whistleblower report came in. And there are whistleblower laws to protect those who are in government who observe something illegal. So if they observe something illegal, they can submit a report to say, I observed this, and it protects them, protects their identity, makes sure that they're protected. Normally, a whistleblower report isn't about the president. This one was. That's what makes it so extraordinary. In that whistleblower report, they allege that in the course of my official duties, I've received information from multiple U.S. government officials that the President of the United States is using the power of his office to solicit interference from a foreign country in the 2020 election. That's a big deal. That's a big deal. So they're alleging that the President of the United States is using its power with the foreign government to intervene in the 2020 election. He goes on to talk about multiple individuals came to him with this information and talked about two specific things. One, an investigation into the Bidens, Joe Biden and his son Hunter Biden, and also an investigation into the 2016 presidential election and the CrowdStrike theory, which is the idea that it was Ukraine and Democrats that were really behind the intervention in the 2016 presidential election. So alleges that those were the two things the president was pushing. Additionally, the whistleblower report says that that those around the president took the transcripts of that conversation and put them on a secret server, a server that's normally reserved for high security information. So the question is, why was that done? All right, so the whistleblower comes out. Then the story breaks in the press, and ultimately the president does something rather extraordinary. He releases the transcript of his conversation, or I should say a rough transcript. Not all of it, but chunks of it. Let's take a look. In that report, President Trump says, I will say that we do a lot for Ukraine. We spend a lot of effort and a lot of time on Ukraine. I wouldn't say that it's reciprocal. So the president is speaking to the president of Ukraine and is saying, this relationship isn't reciprocal. Then he goes on, and President Zelensky responds and says, I agree. We're ready to continue to cooperate for the next step. Specifically, we're almost ready to buy more javelins from the United States. So he says, we're going to buy more javelins, more missiles, right? So the president of Ukraine is saying, we would like to buy some missiles. Now, what does the president say? Well, we'll see in a second, hopefully. All right. So the president says, I would like you to do us a favor, though. And this is a really, really important line. So could you imagine you've gone to a bank and you're asking for a loan. I would like some money, Mr. Banker. And the banker says, absolutely. But I'm going to need a favor, though. It implies something, right? It implies that there's going to be some sort of relationship. He goes on to mention the CrowdStrike situation. He goes on to mention the Bidens, the idea of the investigation into the Bidens. All right, so that happens. Then we get released text messages from diplomats dealing with Ukraine. These are conversations that took place before the phone conversation. One of the individuals, the diplomat Volker, is reaching out to Yermak, who is an advisor to the president of Ukraine. And he says, good lunch, thanks. Heard from White House, assuming President Z convinces Trump to get to the bottom of what happened in 2016. So he's saying, He's going to tell the president to make sure that he's going to get to the bottom of it. The advisor to the Ukrainian president gets this. Once we have a date, we'll revisit the UK relationship, including, among other things, Burisma and the election meddling. So you have the advisor to Ukrainian president saying, we get this. We understand. We understand the relationship. You want us to look into the Bidens, and you want us to look into the 2016 presidential election. We get that. All right, now this is really fun. So this is one of the ambassadors, Taylor, is getting troubled by this. And so he texts, as I said on the phone, I think it's crazy to withhold security assistance for help with a political campaign. Now, notice he sent that at 12:47. It's 5:19 before Sondland responds. Over 4 hours to respond. Text message, it's really usually pretty quick. He's thinking about what's going on, right? Allegedly, he reached out to Donald Trump to say, how should I respond to this? He's texting really hard questions. And the response, Bill, I believe you are incorrect about President Trump's intentions. The president has been clear, no quid pro quo of any kind. And he finishes with my favorite part, I suggest we stop texting back and forth, right? Always a sign of criminality is if you're saying, let's not do any more text. All right, now you're saying, well, maybe it's still this isn't enough information. On October 3rd, President Trump comes forward, holds an impromptu press conference, and says, if they were honest about it, speaking of Ukraine, they would start a major investigation into the Bidens. They should investigate the Bidens. Likewise, China should start investigating into the Bidens because what happened in China is just about as bad as what happened in Ukraine. He said the quiet thing out loud, right? We're not used to this. So there's all these other documents that are saying, he's putting pressure on Ukraine. He's asking them to look into his political rivals. And then he says it, right? So it's really interesting. We step back here. These facts are not disputed, right? These are just things that you can look at. And if you're a member of Congress right now and you're facing this dilemma, it seems pretty easy, right? The facts are there. The truth is there. Now, how you decide upon that is debatable, right? You may say this warrants impeachment. You may say this doesn't warrant impeachment, but it seems fairly simple. I don't know what you're saying. Muck, you didn't talk about any of the exciting stuff. You didn't talk about Hunter Biden being on the board of trustees. You didn't talk about the deep state or $1.5 million from China. You didn't talk about the whistleblower being in cahoots with Shifty Schiff. Oh, that guy is so shifty, right? We didn't talk about that. I think Schiff and the whistleblower playing ping pong in college, right? All these different conspiracy theories are out there. What's interesting to me, hopefully this will come back, is that all those things are fascinating. Most of them have been disproved. A lot of them are conspiracy theories. There may be something to the Hunter Biden story, but none of them are relevant to this. This is simple, and it's easy to understand. But then the question is, why is everything so complicated? And I would put to you, the reason this all seems so complicated is because we have an extraordinary president who is a wonderful, wonderful liar, right? And he creates an entirely different reality that makes this much more difficult to understand. Trump is a Picasso. He's the Michelangelo of lying. I don't know what you're saying. All politicians lie. This is what they do. Comes with a job description. I would tell you Trump is distinct. So this today is the 1,000th day of Trump being in office. 1,000 days he's been in president. In those 1,000 days, according to the Washington Post fact checker, he has said 13,435 false or misleading claims. And you can go to the website and look at them. 13,435 in 1,000 days. There's even a nice little graph where you can see his false or misleading statements over time. And what we see is that he was averaging maybe 13, maybe 14 lies a day. Over the last 2 months, he's been averaging 22 lies or false or misleading statements a day. Unprecedented. You can go back and look at other previous presidents. They're not always truthful. They spin. Nobody on the scale of Donald Trump. It's a unique thing in the American presidency. There's something else to think about here. There's a variety of ways that Donald Trump is untruthful. You can be a liar, right? So there's lying, and then there's also bullshit, right? There's two different categories, and they are distinct in very important ways. The liar understands he's not being truthful. The liar accepts that there is truth, and he is going to be false. The bullshitter doesn't care about lying, right? They just want to craft a new reality. They're indifferent to truth. And I think what we're seeing here, Donald Trump likes both of them. He peddles in both of them. And we can think of some examples. He's talked about the wall frequently, talked about it's rapidly being built. This is not true, right? But he has said that over 218 times. Same thing when it comes to the greatest economy in our history. It's easy to measure these things. There are a variety of ways to do so. That's not true. We have a very good economy. It's not the best in history. He's repeated that over 200 times. We've passed the largest tax cut in the country's history. Also, these are things you can go out and measure and know. It's not true. He's repeated that a lot of times as well. So what we see here is these are lies. Now, what's an example of bullshit? That is saying that Trump Tower Grill has the best taco bowls, right? That's indifferent to truth, right? It's not true. And that he loves Hispanics. That's just strange and odd and bizarre, right? So we see the ways in which Trump blends lying and BS at the same time. Let's jump back to Ukraine. And I want to talk for a few minutes about what he's done in Ukraine. So we talked about what the facts, what the text, what the emails, what the messages say. How has Trump pushed back? How has he tried to recraft the narrative? Well, he's focused on a couple things. One, he's talked about the Bidens as stone cold crooked. He's also talked about the whistleblower, made it up. Talked about Shifty Schiff is the real villain. That's the story we need to focus on. He's gone back to a witch hunt. It worked for the Mueller investigation. He thinks it'll work here. And on, talking about it was a perfect call. When it comes to the Bidens, talking about the Bidens were paid off. They're corrupt. We've got them on tape, right? The idea is that you're shifting the blame. It's not Trump who's the criminal. It's the Bidens who are the criminal. Thinking about the whistleblower. So you saw the whistleblower's complaint. You can read it. You can look at it. You can compare it to Trump's own statement. What he says is he made it up. He made it up. The whistleblower is a big Democrat. He's incorrect. He's inaccurate. These are things that you can just look at and know, but he continues to do that. He also, if we jump over to Shifty Schiff, it's not just the Bidens, but it's Adam Schiff, who should be impeached, should be for fraud. He's the one who's in cahoots. He's not being honest. His parody was unjust and illegitimate, right? So it's about shifting blame and recrafting the narrative. Same thing with talking about a witch hunt. That this is the greatest witch hunt in our country. Worked very, very well in the Mueller report. My favorite, maybe, though, is his talk about it was a perfect call. Like, linguistically, that doesn't sound right. He just keeps saying it was a perfect call. It was perfect. It was perfect. I don't know what a perfect call is, but he keeps repeating that. No pressure. Perfect. My favorite is the bottom one. It was either perfect or really very good, right? That's the kind of category you want to be in, perfect or really very good. So he's smart at how he changes that rhetoric and tries to change the narrative and in many ways confuse us. So it's not just what he says, it's also how he says it. Think about when you see Donald Trump. It's confidence. I don't know if I've ever seen somebody who's so confident in what they say. There are times I see him say something and I say to myself, I know that's false. That's not true. And I say, well, maybe I'm wrong and I got to go check it, right? I mean, when somebody's confident and expresses themselves in that way, your tendency is to believe them. Confidence. He repeats things over and over and over, sometimes hundreds of times. He's confident and he repeats that claim over and over and over. Kind of wears you out, pushing the idea. Finally, he's open about his ideas. He doesn't hide anything. There are no secrets. He says the quiet thing out loud. He tells you what he did. And again, we don't know how to deal with that. We're used to politicians who are shamed, who when they do something wrong, they want to cover it up or not talk about that. He says, I'll talk about it. I'll say it. And we're not sure. Well, if he says it out loud, it can't be bad. So it's a really, really creative way of confronting those who are accusing him. And it's been very, very effective at pushing back. And the important thing is you don't have to believe that he's telling the truth. I mean, it's easy not to believe him, right? Because he's not being truthful. I don't think he believes much of what he says. But that's not the point. The point isn't to be truthful. The point is, or even to get you to believe him, the point is to intimidate you. The point is to create an environment where you don't want to push back. I mean, think about the politicians who have pushed back, Democrats or Republicans. They become a target for Trump. Maybe it's gone permanently. There we go. They become a target. So a lot have left office, either didn't run for office again or were removed for office. One of the few people left is Mitt Romney. And he's a regular target of Trump. This is something that happens. And I have a little sympathy for the Republicans right now when you're facing a president who's indifferent to truth, How do you have to defend when you know there is objective truth when the president doesn't do this? It makes me oftentimes think of Caligula, right? Or I think of this situation. For those of you that don't know him, he was the guy that allegedly put his horse in the Senate, which is sort of a strange thing to do. Now, I don't think Trump is going to put a horse in the Senate, but I do wonder what would happen if Trump nominated a horse for the Supreme Court, right? What if Misty was your next Supreme Court nominee? How would Republicans respond? Would Republicans say, this is outrageous? You can't nominate a horse for the Supreme Court? Or would Republicans say, like, well, he's thinking outside the box. He's really challenging our conventional norms. He's thinking about different ways. It's good to shake up the system every once in a while. To bring in more of a rural perspective to Supreme Court. I think that's pretty absurd. But you're thinking about it now, like, it's possible that he's going to nominate a horse for the Supreme Court. The other person I think a little bit about lately is Václav Havel. He's one of my favorite writers. He was a Czech writer and playwright. He eventually became president of the Czech Republic. And he wrote a lot about what life was like in the oppressive state of Czechoslovakia under the Soviet Cold War Soviet regime. And he said that people got used to that. People got used to the oppression. People got used to the absurdity and the lies. And he talked about that. What happens is we can learn to live within a lie. And I really like that line, that we can learn to live within a lie. We can learn to accept and abide by no truth in the system. And I think if we're honest with ourselves, there is some truth to that. Even those who are angry and frustrated with Trump, we still accept and we still normalize much of that behavior. And we are complicit in living within the broader lie that Trump is creating for the political system right now. And so I return to George Orwell, who asked us to says that see what's in front of one's nose needs a constant struggle. And I think that's right. I think we need to struggle. I think we should challenge ourselves to see what is in front of our face. Because the reality is the political system only is effective if we have a common set of facts that we can debate and argue over. If we move away from that and we accept that there is no truth, there is no reality, I don't know if a democracy can function. So I ask you today, as I wrap up here, to go out and to struggle, to try to see what is in front of our faces. Thank you.